We are live.
Great. Welcome back to Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. We are now switching gears to housing, our other favorite subject. And we welcome back Michael Gahn and our head of the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank. Michael, thank you for making time for this. And John Gray. And I think let's begin with Michael to frame up the challenge that was detected in the language that we passed on special assessment districts in H775. So Michael, if you begin and then we'll go to John.
Sure, and thank you, Michael Gahn, Executive Director of the Vermont Bond Bank. Grateful for this opportunity to address this issue. I was reviewing the CHIP legislation and found language that was a carryover from the TIF legislation that speaks to some definitions of what, and John will do this much better than I can, but it speaks to definitions of what constitutes property taxes and special assessments, unless they're used for operating expenses, are considered property tax and therefore subject to the increment that is, then subject to either the TIF or the CHIP. This presents an issue because we need to secure those revenues for the special assessment revenue bonds that we've discussed. I think this also would be an issue unrelated to our initiative, but also would be an issue for the proposed CPACE changes as well, because the net effect of this is that you couldn't do special assessment revenue bonds, or you couldn't do CPACE for that matter, in an area that was subject to either CHIP or TIF. And the monitoring of that would be extremely challenging. And of course, at the inception, we don't know, what's going to happen over the 20-year life of the bond or so. So that's kind of the issue.
So, and the issue, just in terms of lay terms, is we want to be able to have all our communities be able to perhaps begin with a special assessment to do the water and sewer, let's say, and then sequentially be able to take advantage of CHIP and or a TIF. So for me, a bear of needing it in lay language, that the need is that we don't want to have to choose one or the other. We want our community to be able to take advantage of all the opportunities we offer them to enable the infrastructure and the housing that we so desperately need. Is that fair?
Precisely. The use case that came to mind for me was, let's say we have a greenfield development. First phase is going to be single family homes. Single family homes are a little bit challenging under CHIP. They decide to do a special assessment revenue bond for some of the street infrastructure, water, sewer, but it's a big development site. And so then phase 2 is a multifamily project and they want to do CHIP. Well, that phase 2 area is already included in the special assessment that is then secured by the revenue bond, and then that would preclude that option. And I don't think that's the intent.
So we don't want to preclude things, we want to enable things.
Right, exactly. Yeah, more tools.
I know, I'm just more tools the better. So thank you, Michael. Does anyone have a question for Michael on this favorite frame? Okay, great. Thank you, because we needed to sort of appreciate the problem that we are then, I think, have developed language to solve.
Sure. So, John Gray.
I turn to you.
I'm John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. I don't have language for you today because I wanted to pose two options. They're both simple pieces, but I'll just, again, kind of restate some of what Michael's already framed pretty well. And I'm going to pull up the existing statute so you can see where this potential problem originates from. It's in two places. The statute that I have pulled up for you here, this is 24 VSA 1910B, I think. This was language that was added last year. This is for the CHIP program. This subsection F, that says special assessments. So the first line here says all property taxes assessed within the site, and you can think of this as equally applicable to TIF districts. I can flip to that section if you want, but it's the exact same thing. It just uses TIF district language. So all property taxes assessed within the scope of a tax increment financed district, so TIF district or housing development site, shall be subject to the provisions of this section. I'm gonna pause there. So what does that mean? That means all kinds of property taxes get swept into the retention percentages. And if you think about what the point of this is, it's to make those available for purposes of development. Special assessments are a kind of property tax, so they are necessarily swept into that retention. The reason that you have the problem in front of you today is because of the liveness of the issue that is raised by special revenue bonds. As you know, the special revenue bonds are secured exclusively by the special assessments. And so if you started retaining, right, all of those special assessments, they would no longer be available to back up the special assessment revenue bond, in which case the revenue bond itself would be sort of useless. But there is language here to speak to a particular exclusion. So currently, special assessments are largely pulled into the retention pieces of how tax increment financing works. But as you see here, special assessments levied under, and then we have the call outs to the chapters. I think that CPACE would end up fitting into these chapters, in which case they would necessarily
So
be.
our committee has no knowledge about CSPACE.
That's great. That's great.
So it hasn't come to us yet. It's coming to us in 327, which is on the floor, I think, today.
Yep. So I'll need to
Or
look
maybe
at
not. Anyway, coming to us soon.
I'll need to look at CPACE just to see where it is.
Can you just tell us what CPACE is?
I don't work on CPACE, so but it's a kind of assessment for particular, I think, clean energy purposes.
It's clean. I believe we passed it in one of the Senate natural bills. I think.
So the
Yes,
whole,
Jeremy's telling us, yeah. Thank you, Jeremy. So we have some knowledge of it, but we don't have in-depth knowledge because it hasn't been in our committee.
you have more knowledge than I do, but I have maybe enough knowledge to say that you don't need to worry, which
Okay.
is the best thing I can tell people. So
We
yeah.
like that.
I will just need to check where CPACE is situated. Presuming it fits into one of these chapters, which I'm guessing that it does, then it's necessarily picked up by the language here. It would flow through to whatever is done in this section, meaning that if you are changing the language here and it picks up a cross reference to the CPACE section, you should be good. I will check CPACE and see where it's located, but I think you're going to be fine. And I don't think you're going to need to do anything separate in another bill. But if I come back and have to apologize, that's what it'll be. So special assessments levied under those chapters or under a charter shall not be considered property taxes for the purposes of TIF, CHIP, if the proceeds are used exclusively for operating expenses related to the properties within that site and not for improvements. So this is saying special assessments are largely swept in as a kind of property tax subject to retention if you're doing tax increment financing. However, special assessments that are used exclusively for operating expenses related to properties within that site would not count as a kind of property tax and therefore would not be subject to retention. Michael and I, neither of us were here at the time that this language, it's because this is just language pulled from TIF.
Yeah,
We
this
weren't here when the
old-
initial
old
language
one.
was drafted. We were trying to think through just possibilities for why it might exist in the first place. And you might think of it as maybe this is trying to ensure that folks can't route financing for municipal improvements through special assessments and then have it not be subject to the retention percentages. Therefore, they can dedicate 100% of the special assessment or the like. So we struggled, I think, to come up with great justifications for how someone, what we were trying to identify is, could someone, in trying to solve this problem, could someone use a new language to circumnavigate TIF in some way and route municipal projects down another lane? And we just didn't come up with ready ways in which you could do this, but I do see a hint.
Yeah,
Random question, when was this enacted originally?
So the initial TIF language is back in the 90s, I believe. Actually, it may date. I think you have initial TIF created predating Act 60. That was in the mid 80s, I believe.
no, at 60, 68, 97, 98.
Sorry, the original TIF program in the
Ah,
mid 80s, I believe. And then when Act 60 came along and created the statewide property tax, you obviously had to redo things related to TIF. So you got a new, I say new, I think it probably implemented same measures, but accounted for the new property tax system accompanying Act 60. So there was an update at the same time, right, 97. But the initial TIF program, I think, dates back all the way to the 80s, if I recall. I do have this somewhere.
Well, the question, where did the original language that we're talking about from it when it was first enacted.
Yep, and I think if I can get to where you're trying to go, this question was not a live question at that time. In particular, because special revenue bonds are being contemplated today, and so there was nothing to disrupt in terms of securing a bond and special assessments. The tool just didn't exist at that time. So it's not just, they wouldn't even have to make, if you're trying to identify, did they think through this question when it was enacted and come up with a different answer, or we reject this? They didn't, because they didn't have this available as a question to them. So basically, if you wanted to solve for this problem, which is that you couldn't overlay special assessments on a kind of tax increment financing area, whether that be the TIP district or a CHIP housing development site, if you wanted to make sure that there was no disruption to the revenue bond and that you could overlay these, there's two different ways you could do it within this sentence. You could say special assessments levied under shall not be considered property taxes for the purpose of this section if you have the piece used exclusively for operating expenses, and then you would just add, or if the revenues are secured for purposes of a special assessment bond. So that's one way to do it. It's very,
Sounds like a very simple way.
it's very simple. It's really narrow.
Adding another,
That is the narrowest way to solve this discrete problem. There's a broader way you could do it, and maybe we don't have time to go down all the routes of thinking through where this originated, the problem that it's trying to prevent. But another way is to just say that special assessments themselves shall not be considered property taxes. And if you think about it, you could distinguish special assessments from the kinds of property taxes that you typically administer based on, the value of a property and the like. And obviously, special assessments are entirely separate from the ed fund itself. So the typical concerns we have around ensuring that there's sort of a good faith effort to supply as much municipal effort at the same time that you're trying to avail yourselves of the benefits of the ed fund. All to say, you could do a broader stroke and just say special assessments are not considered property taxes, but the narrowest way that requires the least continued discussion in committee is the former, just to say if the proceeds are used exclusively for operating expenses or if the revenues are secured for purposes of a special revenue.
Thomas,
I like the first option because a special assessment is assessed to the property, so then the argument that it's not a property tax is.
Sure, and what you're doing here is just saying for technical purpose that it doesn't constitute a property tax for purposes of tax increment financing. It doesn't have any other effect beyond the scope of for JIP.
So I think it's not a property tax here, are you excluding the taxpayer's right to use the typical appeals process?
The only it's sorry, just to be clear, it's shall not be considered property taxes for the purpose of this section. So it's really just saying for purposes of being swept into the increment retention, we don't call it a property
Right.
tax.
so I
But
think,
in terms of where it appears as a bill.
Yeah, it doesn't disrupt anything about,
It goes again to the Board of Civil Authority and the typical appeal process.
yeah, this should have no effect on the way that taxes or special assessments are judged.
so I think I agree with Thomas. I think given at this point in the session,
Yes.
that we do the simplest thing
Okay.
possible to protect this opportunity for all our communities. Is that a fair way of putting it? Yeah. Okay, so I would, we're gonna take up 775 again, I think on Friday, is that right?
Yes.
And, we will have a new draft. And Cameron has been working on this with us. So let's go with that, option number one. John,
Okay.
is that okay with everybody? And second thing I just want to bring you up to speed on is that the administration, I had identified, so we're still in 775, the offsite accelerator. 802 Homes as a project is fully owned as a project by our Department of Housing and Community Development. Move in, the program that the Vermont State Housing Authority is fully owned by Vermont State Housing Authority. The offsite accelerator pilot as great as it is not owned by anybody. There's no one entity that's moving this forward. And in that regard, a lot of the work was going to fall on the Department of Housing and Community Development. They felt, I mean, I had felt it wasn't owned, and therefore really it was premature to be doing it this year, and that to go with the additional concern about the risk of the additional credit facility, 1%. I felt I had Cameron draft out, removing the accelerator, the offsite accelerator, and removing the 1% credit facility for consideration this week. Then yesterday, the administration came to us. Alex came and said, my staff doesn't have the capacity to do the offsite accelerator. Very simple. And I would ask that you would pull it. And the treasurer's office is fine. And so I think the draft that we're going to look at on Friday will have no offsite accelerator and will have no additional 1% credit facility. They'll just have what we all agreed to in S328, which was the increase in the LIAC from 10 to 12.5%. So that generates 30 million additional dollars in possible loans, low interest loans from the treasurer's office. So if that's okay with you, that's the draft we're working on. And it was really helpful to have Alex just sort of find the way in on that. So, because that was a big issue, you know, it 100% occurred when there's nobody owning this pilot. So if that's okay with you, that's what we're going to do additionally. So, John, if you'd be kind enough to add this, Cameron, if we add this fix.
By
Michael,
Friday.
thank you very much. I think those are the two fixes we're looking at the moment, 2775, and then we may actually be able to get that baby out of here.
One, I guess one additional question I would have is I think I can safely assume you would like the language change made for both Chip and Tip. So it'd be the same change, just two answers. Okay.
I think it needs to be made for both.
Thank you so much for the quickness on this and considering. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for bringing it to our attention.
Yeah, it's
It's,
timely review. Glad it wasn't next week.
well, you know, we're pretty flexible and we move fast and we can pivot, you know, we can have amendments. It's not over till it's over, and it's not looking like it's over for a while. So look, we are being shut down next Friday. So we're not going to be fully, this warning committee is not going to clearly be fully shut down because it's, we have all the bills coming at us from the House, which begin tomorrow. So we're picking up the first one tomorrow. So we are going to now, so thank you, everybody. I think if you're okay with that, those are the changes we'll make to 775. Add this piece and go with removing the offsite accelerator frame. Okay. David Hall is early, which is so exciting because we're going to just dive right in. And so for those of you who are participating remotely, we are on the floor at 11, which is really irritating. Our morning committees are now also being squeezed by having to start earlier and end earlier. So we are going to pivot now to Rick Sagel is coming to join us, I believe, in 5 minutes, but I think it's fine if we begin with David, and then we're going to hear from Richard Varn, and then we're going to hear from Rick, and hopefully be able to do all those things. So we're going to move to page 211, our data broker bill, and we welcome David.
Yeah,
In a so lovely to have you here.
good morning. It's good to see you. It's good to see all of you.
And in a room that you spent so much time in.
I miss this room. You know, I'm here. But
I mean, like our
occasionally.
traditional portraits of female farmers done by Juan Carlos, who and Dan Gottsagen's work.
I love it.
And this piece, which is part of the collection. But the others are all for sale.
You put your touch on the room, and I love it.
Well, we have economic development, you know. So if you would be kind enough to, we're going to turn to data data brokers, and we're going to address the Secretary of State sections. Rick Sagel is, I assume, coming.
Yes, yes.
And, right. Just having, oh, there, right in my gut. Okay, David, take it away.
All right, so for your record, my name is David Hall, Director of the Business Services Division, Secretary of State's Office. Happy to, yield to Rick at your discretion, obviously, Madam Chair, but in the meantime, I think there's sort of two pieces that touch on our office. One is sort of an upgrade, if you will, to the registration requirements for data brokers. And then the second part is a study at the end of the bill. We have worked with the House and the AG's office to sort of fine tune the components that affect us. We didn't necessarily, come to the legislature and say, you think you ought to change all of this up. These are substantive proposals, for most of which we are substantively agnostic, to be frank with you. Our job is to collect this information. It's to organize it. It's to make it available to the public for scrutiny. It's to make it available to the AG's office for compliance and performance purposes. And it is to make information available to you as you do your public policy work. I mean, procedurally, substantively, the way this would impact us is we would work with our vendor first on a contract amendment, because this could.
You're dealing with the study at the end?
Well, I'm talking right now about our registration
Yeah,
process.
the whole registration. process.
So just take one huge step up.
How's it doing? I mean, give us also an up. I mean, well,
The data broker specifically, or the whole thing?
we're just focusing on data. brokers.
Sure. Well, I want to put it, let me frame it in the context of what we do. So obviously, we're the filing office of record for businesses that are doing business in the state, for UCC filings, Uniform Commercial Code filings. And then we have this patchwork of oddballs, I like to call them. And those are things like telemarketers, amusement ride operators, utility cooperatives, data brokers. And the point really of this initial legislation, which I worked on many years ago, was to have basically a census of who is the data broker dealing with Vermonters' information. And if you're doing that, come register with us so we know who you are. Right now, I checked this morning, we have just over 300 data brokers who are actively registered in Vermont. California has a much more robust system at this point, and I think the last I spoke with them, the estimates are there could be as many as 800 that might end up being registered. So there's some delta between obviously the third, fourth largest economy in the world and Vermont, and who's doing business where. But
Well, I think that's a really important piece to pause on. The average consumer could assume that if there's someone who's registered as a data broker in California, they are very likely, if it's a digital, it's mostly digital, they're doing business in Vermont.
sure,
There is no one who defines or oversees or polices what it means to do business in Vermont. So there are many common companies people might think of that they're using, and I did this with OpenAI, that are not registered in the state of Vermont. If I worry that there's too many bills that try and put a lot of pressure on the registry system as though it's something that's comprehensive. And there's no resources, there's no mandate that it's comprehensive. So I just want to make sure we are aware of what we're trying to get out of more registration requirements.
Well, I think we're wanting to get something.
yeah, I think it's an excellent observation, and as I've testified in response to a similar question you posed in another committee, we're certainly, we are not the registration police.
Yeah.
You know, the law is self-executing, but it's, you know, it's unlike many statutes. There's no 5-part test that says if you check all these boxes, you are doing business in Vermont. Rather, we presume that if you have contacts in our state and you are engaged in certain activities here, the more activity, the more likely it is. But the statute, the way it's written in the negative. It says just by doing these things doesn't necessarily mean you're doing business in this state. But it's a sort of a weight of the evidence kind of test, which is not, you know, unusual in the law. Weight of the evidence, pretty normal. But you know, sometimes it can be challenging, and also it can be questionable for businesses to know: am I doing business? Am I not doing business? If they turn to us, we're not going to give them direct counsel on whether they are required to register based, because I can't do a factual and legal analysis on every business of how many contracts have you signed, what volume of sales, or do you advertise here, or do you own property, or all these things. I don't have the capacity with 110,000 businesses to do that kind of analysis. What would be the result of I think, or at least the intended result of this legislation is with a robust registration framework with more resources for the AG to be able to sort of scrutinize the registry and in fact compare it to California. I mean, the testimony that I heard is that they would say, hey, we've noticed you guys are registered in California and you're not registered in Vermont. Should you be? And it starts there. And from there it goes down the follow-up, maybe enforcement rabbit hole. At bottom, we are the holders and managers of the data. Somebody else does something with it. The public comes to us and says, I want to know who the data brokers are. They download our records.
Right.
AG's office comes to our record database and says, we see who is here and who is not here. Now, what are we going to do with that information? We're going to compare it to California. We're going to compare it to other states. We're going to compare it to the company's own statement of what their practices or their policies are, or whatever. I don't know.
But I get, so we want to ask the AG's office, why
AG's
can't
office is not-
they compare those records now?
Sure. I mean, they can compare what we do have
Yeah.
to what California has,
Right.
and see gaps.
Mhm.
I mean,
What
So-
would
so-
change?
so the registration requirement, though, like you're observing, already here. So
Right.
the universe is what the universe is at this time. You know, I think part of what this bill does is it really expands the amount and type of information that would be in each registrant's record. And B, you know, it frankly steps up consequences. I mean, it raises the fee for registration. It raises the penalty for failure to file. It raises penalties. It poses new penalties for the omission of information, or, you know, if you supply incorrect information. If you tell us you allow, you know, customer A, B, and C to opt out of these kinds of practices, and then turns out you do not, there are new penalties for that. And that's, you know, that's an enforcement aspect. That's not mine.
And does that mirror what California has? Why do we think they have 800 registrants instead of 300?
I don't know why I mean, I don't know the why. That's okay. But, for us, you know, the big impact is we have to redesign the registration workflow. We have to build new, you know, mechanisms for checks, boxes that you check, documents that you upload, blah, blah, blah. It will cost us money, but the fees should cover it. It will cost us time and work. That's what we do. It will ideally yield more information for consumers and for regulators about what's happening with these businesses if they're doing business.
Well, isn't that the objective?
So that's the point, right?
Yeah.
That's the point. So that's sort of our first piece. Happy to answer specific questions about the substance of what they're requiring. I mean, like I said, I'm agnostic on what the data collection practices are. I just have to build the thing. So as long as it's a clear roadmap to me, I know what to tell, you know, how to work with my vendor to build out this workflow. Fine.
But the second thing that we're looking at is
Yeah,
study.
it is.
So that happily, at least, there is a model that has been fully fleshed out in California. And so you have an opportunity to look at that and see how we could Vermont size it So talk to
Yeah.
us about the study.
I mean, fair. Ironically, usually Vermont sizing works in our favor, but that doesn't always, that's not always the case in the context of IT projects because, systems cost what they cost, regardless if you have 38 million people or you have 700,000 people. So I'm not going to prejudge anything, but this bill started its life with this single point of access deletion mechanism in the law. And we said, we're not equipped for that and we don't know how to do that. And we need to really take a step back and reflect on that. Hence a study with some, generous timelines. I'll tell you from our conversations with California, it cost them over $4 million to build the drop system that they have, which again, serves 36 million residents. And they've had, at the time I last spoke with them, they had about just shy of 200,000 requests through that system to be dropped from data broker collection practices. So,
And but it's only been open for a bit, right?
right, yeah, that's correct. So where that ends up, nobody knows. So the types of things that we would look at in the study would be, can we build this ourselves? Can we piggyback on the California system? Or is there some other mechanism? And when I say, is there some other mechanism, right now, there are already companies that do this. You have to pay them, but they manage varying degrees of sort of throughout time management practices. You can do like a one-time, please go out and find all the data brokers and flush my information. Or you can do a subscription where they're repeatedly pinging these data brokers and requesting on your behalf that they drop your information. So there's a public, model, but it's California and it's expensive and complicated. And then there's a private model, and then maybe there's a Vermont model, but I know that this has an appropriation for this work, and I'll just be blunt, I understand that money may be in jeopardy, and
Well, the money is, I wouldn't say in jeopardy, it's in
Okay.
negotiation
Fair.
between the House and the Senate.
fair. I mean, I certainly.
Well, but we also haven't voted the bill out with the money in it.
Correct.
So
I mean, that's what I mean.
we
It's
probably want to take the pulse of this committee, if that's the best use of money, when we're also trying to implement the voting rights act. Other things that the Secretary of State's office attention might need to be on in this moment.
Fair. And
although different divisions.
Well, sure, but negotiation should include a consideration for, is this the best use of $50,000 for now?
yeah, I think the request for the funding for expertise and assistance is there because as much as I like to learn new things, I can't tell you the
Mhm.
technical requirements that would be necessary for us to be able to avail ourselves of the California system.
Does the Secretary of State's office manage the system in California?
No, they have a whole robust privacy outfit that does all of that.
Right. So I think we need to hear from California, ADS, et cetera. But we don't have $50,000 to just say, let's
Well,
see
we
if this works.
It's not our decision, it's the appropriations committee, and we've made our case for, including it, and so they are.
We wouldn't have made that case because we haven't discussed it.
We have actually, and they, and the House is very clear on it, so we'll see where we end up. So, it will be, we're on third reading today, and it will then be part of the conference, I think, discussion. Thank you. That's sort of what, on the study, that's what I think where we thought you'd probably would be. I mean, that's the question is, do we going to be able to finance it? Let's find that out soon enough. And,
Well, but also, is it partially our job to answer those questions before we mandate the Secretary of State's office to do something?
I think the Secretary of State would probably have to, if we want consumers to be able to delete in a thoughtful way the data they want to delete. I think
we'd be asking our corporate filing system to do the work of a different agency or group of people with different expertise.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. It may not end up there. But I think you're equipped at the moment to ask the key questions and to make recommendations with ADS to the legislature about how we move forward with this idea. And I think that's all we're asking, is that we need a recommendation after looking at what it would cost, whether we do it ourselves, whether we outsource it, we don't have the time to do that in this committee. We're about to adjourn, hopefully. So, I mean, I think that's where we have to ask the experts in the room to do, yes, Thomas.
Am I remembering correctly that one other state has implemented the system that this would study to see if we could? It's just California. Is that correct? I'm seeing a nod. So I'm leaning towards the same area, that I don't want Vermont spending our scarce resources to do a smaller economy on something that bigger states are going to blaze the trail on. So I would ask you, does this have to be done this year, or could this just as easily be considered in years out when we have more of the larger state blazing the trail and setting the precedent for us to build off of?
Sure. I mean, the study is just a study,
Yeah.
and the first report is not due back until 27, and then a final in 28. So there's time. I guess I just want to modulate expectations, maybe. How about that? If we are charged with doing a study and there's no money, and I can't pay a technical expert to tell me here's how you need to design an API to tie into California's system, I'm just not going to be able to tell you how to do that. I might say this would work further exploration, or we think people should just pay LifeLock,
Yeah, right.
that may be the result of what I get, but it's a long time to sort of review it, and as you suggest, to see how it plays out in California. They built it. It took them several years. It cost them $4 million. Am I going to come back to you and say Vermont should just build this brand new system? Probably not, but I'd have to talk to experts about that,
And so, it has struck me that this study is being asked for the Secretary of State, but I think we're right. ADS needs to be involved with this as well. Does it make, we may or may not have the money.
Sure.
But if we did have the money, it would be obviously, I think, something you would want to be doing in conjunction with ADS.
Well,
Let's get ADS in here and let's get California to just tell us on the record what path is the most worth pursuing at what cost. I mean, well, I do think I'm not willing to say we're ready to spend $50,000 when we haven't taken responsibility ourselves to understand the best practice that we're seeking. I would oppose a study at a $50,000 appropriation of money we don't have.
There we are.
the last thing I guess I'll say is, this type of mechanism would definitely represent a big step up for the Secretary of State's office in the type of data that we collect and retain. Like right now, if you come to me and you put your social security number or your business's EIN in a filing, I'm going to reject it. Singe my hand, because I don't want that data. I don't want the responsibility for managing it or retaining it. I don't want the risk of, the various actors coming to my system. That's not what we do. And
so you also see this as an exposure of the Secretary of State's office.
I'm saying if we are the ones who end up doing this, however we do it, it will be a next level up in the type of security and operational function that we perform at the time. We're not taxed. We don't have your birthday and your social and your mother's maiden and all that stuff. We don't want that stuff. We're trying to help people not be, exposed in that way. So, that would be part of the thing that we would need to look at in the context of such a study would be, what's the next level of security and what are the robust measures we need to assure that if we now are going to become this repository of this sensitive information, how do we protect it? What are the rules, around the transmission and use of it, et cetera? So it's definitely a complicated topic. I don't want to disabuse you.
In this discussion and development of this section, was there discussion of partnering with ADS on this?
I think they have to be at the table because
Yeah.
it's security risk, but it won't just be them. It will also be our IT vendor or others who may want to do the work. It will have to involve a conversation with California about what works, didn't work. Can we use your system? Is that even technically possible? It's a it's complicated topic.
Any additional staffing requirements?
Not for the study per
Not
se.
study, I think.
I mean, for the system, I'm sure there would be more work involved.
Well, in the short run is what I'm saying.
I don't think so, not for the study at least. But that's, you know, again, that's the money and the tax of the studies to avail ourselves of people who have expertise that we do not.
Okay, any other questions for David?
What if we didn't do this? We didn't do the data book bill right now.
Sure.
What are the implications from your perspective?
We would keep on keeping on. So, I mean, there's literally already a registration requirement for data brokers. But it's thin. I mean, right now they come, they give us a few data points. They pay $100 a year. It's a little bit confusing. There's no amendment authorizing law, which has been a problem for us. So I appreciate that that's in here. It's a curious construct, the way that it's sort of a retrospective registration requirement that arguably attaches in January only for activity you did the year before. So is the data kind of stale right now? Possibly. Are we getting full compliance right now? I have no idea, but it sounds like maybe not completely. So, you know, I think if you don't do it, it's status quo ante. And, you know, there's a data broker registry and you can come look at it and see who's registered and take it from there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, thank you, David.
Sure.
We are going to turn to Richard Garn. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
It's good to have you. Welcome. You have never been in this committee before. We're just going to quickly introduce ourselves.
Thank you.
Thomas.
I'm Tom Chittenden. I represent the southeast area of Chittenden County.
Asia Robbinsdale, State District.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor District, East Side of Vermont.
Randy Brock, Franklin County and Northern Grand Isle County.
Good morning, Richard. David Weeks, representing Rutland County.
Richard, welcome. Introduce yourself and
Please.
share
Will do.
Share your input.
Happy to. Richard Varn, former state senator, state representative from Iowa. Been the executive director of this Coalition for Sensible Public Records Access for about 22 years, working on public information and public data for about 40 some. And been both an advocate for access as well as been a person that managed access. I was a CIO for the state of Iowa. The first one they had was CIO for the 6th largest U.S. city, CTO and CIO for university and federal projects. So I've been on both sides of the managing data and advocating for its access. So I've been reading for the last 22 years a few thousand bills on policy, on public records access. And I'll be retiring soon, so I won't have that pleasure much longer. So I'm sharing with you what I've gleaned from that. I also spent time on the Uniform Law Commission's Uniform Data Privacy Act. That was 2.5, almost 3 years of work there, as well as on 2 other ones on data redaction tied to Daniel's Law and to doxing. And when I was a legislator, I advocated for and used many model acts and got them through the legislature. And I'm a big fan of trying to find, especially in the Midwest, we're all sort of try to hang together in the Midwest. I know in the Northeast, you sort of do as well, have sort of an affinity for some of your fellow New England states. And I always look to say, we got a lot of border cities. We got a lot of border issues between, they say, Davenport and the Quad Cities and Omaha. And we always try to figure out how we could get along with folks. So I'm not an absolutist on any of these topics. I'm a pragmatist with strong principles. So that's what you're going to hear. I'm going to have strong principles.
Pragmatist with strong principles. I like that.
And I'm in favor of accountability and the accessibility and the trust and truth that we get out of public records. I spent a lot of my career advocating for that. It's an odd little thing to be spending a lot of time on, but I felt it was worth my time to get freedom of information well understood and appreciated. So I'm going to bring that perspective to this. So in the Uniform Act, we were able to explain that the public records law, especially public records, but publicly available information in general, has its own set of governing principles and laws surrounding it. And as such, that was the statute that would govern the release of any data, its use, and governance. For example, when your driver's privacy protection covered data gets released from your folks, the transportation people, they govern its release. They have strict contracts regulating its release, deciding how it can be used. In other cases, we have had thousands of discussed exemptions. Vermont has passed several dozen exemptions to the Public Records Act to protect specific sets of data from release. So we've been going back and forth since the 70s when the first Sunshine Law passed and since the Freedom of Information passed at the federal level, deciding what exactly would be a public record that was accessible to whom for what. And because of that, and spending about 2.5 years explaining that to the people of the Uniform Law Commission, they agreed that there should be a broad and general public exemption for public records and publicly available information. The reason that was important not only is because it had its own governing structure and they're important, it's because there are many, many, many uses. It's easier to probably say what uses are not made of public records and what uses are made of them. So there's tons of uses that are made of public records across the spectrum of public, private, charitable, educational activities of all kinds. So when I see in the law, you have an exemption that is broad at first and then takes back things, which doesn't align with other states. So Vermont would be an outlier. I've read and worked on the rules and the laws in all of the states that have passed a privacy or data broker registry or data broker regulation act. And this would be an outlier, especially in 3 areas, and I'll point them out. The 3 areas are specifically on page 11 of 43 of the bill, and they're in your publicly available information definition. And it specifically deals with, and I'll come back to item 2. Item 2 is I think I understand why you're doing that, but item 3, item 4, and item 6 under there, which is information made for sale, any inferences made from anything made from sale or from a public website that's offered as a profile, and any brokered personal information that's combined together. And I want to take each of those separately, if I may. So the first one is information that's made available for sale is used by many, many people, and inferences are also drawn from that. Public records or publicly available information that's made available for sale doesn't become private because it's made for sale. It's still publicly available, but this law would allow it to be deleted, creating a patchwork quilt with holes in it about what's available in databases and what is actually true in the world. Just as an example, LexisNexis is a database. This is for sale to lawyers and to others who might want to look up newspaper articles or look up cases. If I read this correctly, I would be allowed to go and ask them to delete cases I was involved with or newspaper articles as I was in that was in that database because it was made available for sale. And that's an example where we cross over both the utility of the data and the First Amendment right to speak about it, publish it, use it, talk about it, draw inferences from it, and just think about it, because we can't probably ever know something without drawing inferences and thinking about it. And that's what gets us the inferences. You know, being able to make inferences from, say, if I used data that was for sale, or if I used data that was available publicly, say in the case of Clarence Thomas, if I made an inference about Clarence Thomas getting help from his friend to be able to acquire a house, and I wanted to make an inference about what I thought about that, I think I have the right to do that. And I don't think that the databases that held that data should be subject to deletion because I can make an inference about that from it. So inferences are our right to think and our right to talk, and I think it treads heavily on the First Amendment. The last one is the brokered personal information. As you've written the law, you've broadened the definition of what is personal information, brokered personal information. So you've made it very generic and very broad. And you've said if anyone has that and there's a right, and you say that the data broker must put on their website a opportunity to delete that data, how that could be deleted, then there would be asking them to delete data that would be part of this brokered personal information. They would also have to delete the public records, the publicly available information that's in that database. And I want to mention that in combination with that, if you look further into the bill, it's back buried a little later in the law.
may I
Right.
just
Sure, sure.
Can-
please do.
clarify what our legislative council? I believe this is all current law. This is all in kids code, current law.
So, Rick Sable with the Office of Legislative Counsel, the definition of publicly available information, I believe, is what's in kids code. I'll double check. Broker personal information is not. That's unique to this.
That this
Very
is unique to the, because I know
Yeah.
some of this is in kids code and some of it isn't. So I just was curious what's we've already passed and what isn't.
Yeah, I was going after the underlined section that were added new and including the parts that say it does not include. That's the part I'm after. Publicly
Right,
available
no,
information.
I appreciate where you are.
Mhm.
My understanding is that most of this was already in kids code, which we passed last year. So I was just curious which of those Romanettes were current law and which were added, and I'm unclear on that.
Maybe when I testify.
Okay, well, Rick will testify after you. So.
That's
keep
great.
going, Richard.
Yep. So if they're in current law or not, I would still object to them. So I appreciate your clarification though.
No,
So
I
the
just,
other, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
nope, keep
Yeah.
going.
Yeah, so the other part that's buried back in there, it says that if there's a reason, you have a variety of exemptions as to why data doesn't have to be deleted. One of those, several of those stated, and then it stated, if in fact data is not deleted, it would have to be segregated. Then 2 clauses later, you say you can't use it for any non-authorized purposes, even if you don't delete it under the one exemptions.
So
That
just,
clause is, and I'll get to I can get you that spot in the bill. Thank you.
yeah, just help us.
Yeah, I will. Just give me a second. I got to jump to that browser window.
Okay.
Pull that up.
Hey, I think it's page 37.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Page 37, and it's clause 1 says you have to keep it segregated, and clause 3 says that you can't use it. I would just point out that the fact that you're saying that can't be used is sufficient. Segregating it into another database, having been a CIO, I can tell you that doesn't really mean anything. The important thing is making sure it's not used.
Yeah,
And your C, 13C, line 13, item C, not used, sold, shared, or processed for any other purpose is sufficient. We raised this in the California Drop Act discussion in a Hudson Cook memo, law firm Hudson Cook wrote for us about the describing how individuals should manage their databases. It's really difficult to tell all these people how to manage their data that way. So I would just say that clause is not needed, but it does go back to the brokered personal information and whether or not it's combined with publicly available information. So the conclusion of this is you've converted by these clauses, whether in statute or in the proposed law, converted these publicly available bits of information into private data by their sale, by making inferences from them, or by combining them with other data. And that to me is not, accommodating the reasons we have it for accountability, transparency, use, public societal benefit, truth, fairness, the things that we need from this. We've done an interesting job of trying to balance between, what is that you're going to do to protect the consumer. But there's a lot of things that create holes in this bill that allow bad actors, malevolent actors, to use the ways that they can delete data to enable them to do bad things. We need to strike the balance between those two efforts to make sure that people cannot use the right to delete or opportunity to delete data using this kind of a definition to get rid of information that shows them in a bad light appropriately, that is actually something that's true and something that people should know. So the last thing I want to mention is by being an outlier, I believe that you're going to put both Vermonters at a disadvantage on the side I just mentioned, meaning that there will be holes cut into this. A crazy quilt's a fun thing to make, but it's not to me, a crazy quilt of laws doesn't make for a good structure if it leaves holes in the kinds of protections that we might expect and the kinds of uses we might want to make of public records and publicly available information. It also will burden Vermont businesses and Vermonters being this outlier. Maybe the big folks can comply easily with some laws like this, but the local businesses always struggle when there's an inconsistency between states and laws, and it's difficult to comply. So the disadvantages, and I want to close with this. He wrote this for in the brief for the California folks, and there's a lot of uses for public information, and on the discussion that was just held on a study potentially for, do you want to do a drop act, or do you want to, California spent $15 million or so, and this couple $1 million a year to run the validation service to identify that the person is who they say they are who's asking. So it's a big deal. What we thought also is maybe you should mention that informed consent is an important part of this. There's a lot of benefits. I understand you've stated there's a lot of negatives that people don't like that comes from their information being shared. There are also a lot of benefits. A true informed consent would include things like telling people that they get public health and safety notifications, that there's civic engagement involved, that nonpartisan organizations use this to provide voter registration information, polling data, ballot stuff, education and scholarship information, to identify and outreach to people to be eligible things, community resources, using it to target food assistance, housing, job training, social services, financial benefits, offer consumers discounts. If there's been a big storm, someone might come in and offer a discount on roofing. These are the other side of informed consent, to make sure that when people know when they're opting out, and if you go forward with that, this kind of makes 2 points, that there's a lot of great uses for this information. And if you're going to do an opt-out at all, you should have informed consent, and it should show both the benefits and the negatives of what they might get from opting out or deleting data. And I'll stop there and take
no doubt. I think all of us wish that actually with all these, when we had the opportunity right now, Ancestry.com evidently has a very clear, as you go through the whole process, a very clear, you would make choices all the way along. So you're not at the end of transacting something, having pages and pages of stuff you're never going to read. But it would be wonderful if every data collector, every opportunity for collecting this had an informed consent opportunity where it said, these are pluses and the minuses. Do you want it to leave it? Do you want to keep it? I mean, it would be great if that existed and was embedded in every one of these choices that we had. But I agree. I think that's as much on the businesses as it is on all of us considering.
I think he's saying smaller businesses have a harder time doing that.
No,
Amazon, Ancestry.com, they could get through all of that much more easy.
Yeah. Richard, thank you for this. I'm just curious. You're right. It would be great if the federal government would act and we didn't have to do patchwork quilts to protect our consumers. Where do you see us in this challenging administration moving forward on any of this protection nationally?
Well, I always used to make the joke, you'd never go broke betting against tax reform or comprehensive privacy law in the United States. So still willing to make that joke, although it's not funny. I don't think it's very easy for them to get there currently in the current Congress to make but there is a bipartisan coalition that's been talking about it. I think that there's probably more agreement on what to do around young people to try to protect them both in the AI space and around privacy issues than there is around general privacy. It's hard to write general data protection privacy law for the United States, and especially since we have multiple ones already that provided those balancing tests. So it's difficult to navigate between the industries and people that have been figured out how to make it work in these different sectors and trying to come up with the general principles that applies to everybody. So I think it's a tough row to hoe for the feds to come up with one, but which is why we spent so much time on the Uniform Data Privacy Protection Act to say, let's at least get a model. And for me, my focus is, mostly on the publicly available information part of it. So I can stray about anywhere you want since I'm an eclectic person, been in politics a long time. I have opinions, but we focused on that part to at least say, the Public Records Actors are your own Public Records Act. You all in Vermont have fought and discussed it and focused on it, both with the press and the advocates and the gadflies and the agencies and the legislators, and everybody has had a chance to weigh in on that. And that law defines what should be publicly available. And I just want to protect that. I want to protect the uses we make of it and the integrity that it has. I don't want it to be deleted in places that then that truth disappears from that database. That's like this, the uniformity I'm looking for is at least protect that part.
Great. Thank you very much. Any other questions for Richard? Okay, Rick, Richard, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You submit your testimony, or have you already done so?
I was gonna hear any of the questions that you had, and I will submit a written document after.
Right. That would be splendid.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Are you 2 hours behind us, or you're 2 hours behind us? Just one?
Just one. I'm in the Midwest, so in the central,
Yes,
I'm in
well,
Texas now.
Midwest is
but
broad.
Yeah. So,
There's part of it. Okay,
yeah, there's one back. So, all right. Thank you though.
Rick, welcome.
Good morning. Rick Sagel with the Office of Legislative Counsel. Here to walk through a proposed committee amendment, if that's where you're going to begin, or I can answer
Do
questions.
you want to answer any of the questions? Because I think you thought there were some questions raised with Richard that you, and with David that I thought you wanted to address before we move to the amendment.
So and here, send me a Zoom link if you have it for today. The question about the same definitions. I hesitate to equate had that any meaningful when definitions match or don't match. But the publicly available information in this bill does match the kids code definition, but again, they're different laws. The kids code, there's no deletion of data, there's no data broker regulation. I think it's good in some ways for consumers and businesses to have this, to know what publicly available information is. I don't know if I would associate it with the Public Records Act. That's something to me separate. That is information that the public has a right to, that the government does. It's not consumer information, it's government information. So I would separate those two things personally. And the brokered personal information is just this bill. We don't have other laws that reference brokered personal information because it's specific to data brokers. And keep in mind, this is a data broker bill. We are in the world of data brokers. This is not a comprehensive data privacy law, which would apply to all businesses.
Right.
Which David Hall represents how many? 200 are registered in the state?
Yeah.
300? Yeah, I don't know how many of those have a wrong address. I don't. But important to remember, the world that we're talking about here is the data broker world, which is not every business in Vermont or every business country.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. I assume I got a link to share my screen. Okay.
Great.
Are there any
I
other
think-
questions that I missed? I didn't come right away for David.
I think we,
Next question about
Grant,
data brokers. And some businesses don't have any connection with data brokers. But just about every business I think of does use some kind of data broker, if nothing else from the credit bureau, for example, that exchanges information about their customers. It's hard if that business accepts credit. There are probably other kinds of files that they look at that may contain either customer information or vendor information or whatever.
Yeah, data brokers still a need that businesses have. Depends on.
And the problem is, are we creating systems in which we have various pieces of data regulated by laws such as the kids code over here and this bill over here that may conflict or leave things out, but that they really do overlap and ought to be in effect reconciled every time we do a privacy bill.
So it's a good question. Part of my job and what I do is to inform you all of these potential conflicts and opportunities to reconcile. I think that's something that I should do and I'm tasked to do. And that's why we have portfolios. So my portfolio includes data. So I'm aware of this bill of S71, of H639, genetic data privacy, comprehensive. So kids code, all these bills are floating around.
There's an
And
education.
ed tech, all these bills,
It's too much.
one way or another. Thank you.
It is too-
I am an Kilbrin.
It is not good legislation when it is in all of these different places.
So
Well,
and the issue is, are we
And not
just
any
like
fault of Rick's.
looking to recognize, we start with this bill right here, are we looking to see that it reconciles with all the other bills that are ought to reconcile?
So this one I think is totally separate because you are talking about data brokers and they would be covered by data privacy if that were to pass in the form of those. But I think this is something that is more specific to a certain type of business as opposed to it, like kind of like genetic data privacy. That the world of that bill is these direct to consumer genetic testing companies. There are a handful of those in the world that do that. There's a handful of data brokers in the world. So I think maybe bigger handfuls. But
I was gonna say 800 is a bigger handful.
but you're talking, yeah, you're
As
talking.
opposed to 3.
Sure,
Which-
but it's more than 3.
Genetic.
There's more than 3 genetic. Those are the 3 named, but there's probably close to 100 that you don't know about. You would not. They're not household names for the genetic testing companies.
But I guess can we pause on like, what are we hoping this bill accomplishes? Because if we're hoping it gets us 800 data brokers in our registry instead of 300, then okay, you know. I don't think we write the bill this way to do that. I wouldn't write the bill this way to do that.
Relatedly, I do want to answer that question, but I just want to pick up on the last comment you made too. I do think there are too many bills floating around, and I thought I heard you say that this stands alone, but I've also heard that S71 in many ways that passed by the Senate has some data broker components to it. Is that a mistake?
So S71, depends what happens to it, could,
As passed by the Senate.
as passed by the Senate, it has every data privacy bill that is active in the country has a deletion mechanism, or an opt-out in one of those two things, if not both. So yes, S71, as passed by the Senate, allows consumers to delete data with exemptions, right? Just like the data broker bill. So this is specific to data brokers who use data for business purposes. The comprehensive data privacy bill is not always data that's being used for advertising, marketing, whatever that is being used for.
So on that same point, I'd be supportive of starting to unify some of these discussions and bringing the S71 as passed by the Senate into this construct of H211 with the data brokers. Is that answer my question about what we're trying to accomplish?
Okay, I'm really focused on data brokers. That's the bill we have in front of us, and we have to get it out by next Friday. So I think that that
We don't have
much,
You don't have to get it out.
excuse me, that is what the pro tem.
Well, again,
And
if we're gonna
it's all-
pass it at all, we
The
want
warning
to pass a
committee-
bill that makes sense.
Right,
And if
absolutely.
we don't have a bill that makes sense. and
I think this
integrate
bill makes
properly
sense.
With the other things that we're
Right.
doing, we shouldn't pass it at all.
Right, but I think this bill makes sense. I think this is a helpful addition to protecting our Vermonters from having their data sold when they don't want it sold to places they don't want it sold. We heard a great example of this with ICE the other day, in terms of how our LexisNexis information was being sold to ICE. So, no, I'm sorry. I think this has clear consumer protection in it that we are wanting to address as people who are responsible for protecting Vermonters. I do not, I think I'm trying to be pragmatic, as Richard said. I'm trying to be pragmatic with our values in place. And I think that we can actually do that in this narrow circumstance. So the data privacy bill is coming at us. There's no question. It will come at us and it will be here. But at the moment, this is a separate piece of protecting data from being sold to actors we do not want to have that information, or we don't want that information sold. People
How
want to
does that
make
do that?
it does that. Well, through the whole bill, and I actually would like to go through the amendment that we have in front of us because I have to leave in a few minutes. And I think so let's look at the exemptions that I think we are looking at. And we are working towards compromise on this with issues that have been raised prior. And I think we're working on trying to get to yes with exemptions that work. So, Rick.
Okay, draft 1.2 of the committee amendments. The first and second instances are technical grammatical changes, so nothing substantive. I'm happy to explain. The as passed by the House version, the subdivision A on line 10, it just wasn't worded correctly. It's still the email, internet, and phone number of the data broker. So fixing that order of classifications or information. And then the second instance of amendment, again, the wording was incorrect. It's nothing substantive here, just rephrasing how that item 2 on line 15 was worded. On page 2, instance 3. So because this is an instance of amendment, I'm going to refer to the bill as passed by the House. This is amending. We are amending subdivision C3B, which is on page 36 of the as passed by the House. You go a second, page 36. So line 11,
Sorry, what page on the original?
page 36. And just give you the deleted language. Hey, this is the deletion exemptions for data brokers. So on line 3, a data broker may deny a consumer's request to delete the consumer's brokered personal information to the extent that no change to A. B, the brokered personal information is, so subdivision I, Romanet I, is being removed and replaced by what is in the amendment. So you see data subject to, and you have 2 exemptions, Title 5 of Graham Leach Bliley, as amended, or Title 6 of the Consumer Credit Protection Act, that's fair credit reporting. And then regulations for both of those that are adopted in the Act. So these provide data level exemptions. If a entity is processing data that is subject to one of those 2 federal laws, they would not have to delete the data if the consumer requests that it be deleted. They're still a data broker. They still have to register, still have to pay the fee, but they would not have to delete the data.
Okay, so this is a data level exemption.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions?
So can I give you a comparison? If this were to say entity, because you may hear that's the other option is for it to be an entity level.
Why don't you move your screen up so that we can see the, right.
When you use entity, so what that would mean is that an entity, let's say a bank, car dealer, payday lender, right? There's a whole group of entities that would meet Graham Leach Bliley because they're a quote financial institution, right? So it doesn't matter what data they process because they're an entity that is governed by these one of these 2 acts. They would not have to delete the consumer statement. So it's a broader exemption, and you're free to do that. It's a broader exemption. The data level is specific to the data that is covered by one of those 2 laws, right, which is non-public personal information for Graham Leach Bliley, per reporting, similar consumer non-public information. That would be used under federal law that consumers have rights with as well. Like the reason you have exemptions here because federal laws govern these privacy practices, but they're not going to be as comprehensive as 211. You can be more protective of consumers. That's up to you all. The federal law has a baseline protection, privacy protection. States are allowed to give more privacy if they want. Does that help explain the options? That's what it comes down to, right? Banks, auto dealers, they're already complying with federal law. Hopefully.
Right.
There's PRA if they don't, by the way. They can be sued by consumers if they don't comply. However, states give more privacy. And that's the argument, is that how much do you want to give? It's policy. That's what it comes down to.
Okay. Keep going.
So those are 2. So you're removing the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is, I think, included in subdivision 2, Romanet II.
Yeah.
The 4th instance, I'm on the same C3B, going down to page 37 of the bill, striking out line 3 through 5, the process solely in the data broker's capacity. So keeping that introductory phrase, process solely in the data broker's capacity as a processor 2, a new exemption, the state or a political subdivision of the state. So if the data broker is processing information for the DV, HS, or a local, a town, county, that data broker would not have to delete the data because they are conducting work on behalf of a government entity, state, not federal, state or local.
And is all of that data, all of that government, or state or political subdivision, is that all of that publicly available?
No.
No.
No. But some of it could be your address. Yeah. Depends how you share it. If a consumer by consumer thing, sometimes you share that information or you make it publicly available on your own.
Okay.
Romanet 2 does not change. It's just being structured differently. A business to which consumer had the direct relationship. So again, if the consumer, if you have a relationship with a bank, insurance company, and that company that you have that relationship with has a data broker processing your information, that is exempted, and they would not have to delete your information. Okay.
Yeah.
3, a business working on behalf of another business. So basically a data broker that has a direct relationship with the consumer as a term is defined, same thing, direct relationship, provided that the data broker is a nonprofit organization established to provide enrollment data reporting services on behalf of post-secondary schools as defined in Title 16. This is a very specific use case. You heard testimony from Clearinghouse, I believe. They do education,
Yeah. This is
certification.
in response to Tracy's,
Correct.
the education, data.
Degree verification.
Right.
That type of work. So you have to be a nonprofit. Not all these entities are nonprofits that do this work. So they would not be exempted. You have to be a nonprofit and you have to work directly for a business that has a relationship with the student in this case.
Right. Okay, so this responds to the request, Tracy.
Very specific use case.
Yeah.
So that ends the exemption sections. You're increasing exemptions. You may want, there may be a request for more. You can certainly give more exemptions to the committee on what you want to do.
Okay.
With that.
So before we go further, any questions on these? These are pretty big compromise exempt. This is an amendment that really represents some compromise, and the AG may want to weigh in on this. I don't know who else in the room would want to weigh in on this, but this reflects some compromise. Bridget, Jamie, Todd.
Todd, did you want first, or would you like?
Yeah, Todd.
I will just.
Who would like to go first?
I'm
Todd?
happy to weigh in. Bridget Morris on behalf of Morris Strategies, and I'm here on behalf of S&P Global, who is a registered data broker who works with the DMV on the Driver's Privacy Protection Act. And we are looking for the same exemption request that is in S71 as passed by the Senate, and also the current version that's in House Commerce, which is, which the language is, hold on, I have to pull up the exact language, but an exemption for the Driver's Privacy Protection Act of 1994, 18 U.S. Code Section 2721 to 2725. And Jamie, I don't believe that.
Yeah. Jamie Fian on behalf of the Consumer Data Industry Association. You may recall Sarah O's was here last week testifying on the issues that they're identified with this bill. And I think it's similar to what Bridget just mentioned. You know, Sarah mentioned specifically the need for legitimate use exemptions, and those included GLBA, which is here, appreciated for that one.
Yeah.
This is a different version of fair credit reporting that we don't see in other states that's proposed here. Our preference would be for the.
Well, it may not be in other states, but does it work for you as a compromise?
Still having my client check on that.
Okay.
Because
Great. Well,
the
it's for
fear,
first time,
is lack, you talked about all morning, lack of consistency in the bills. If it isn't the same, are we looking at treatment of the same data, but for two different purposes under this bill and under S71, which is an implementation challenge, to say the least. The third is, as Bridget just mentioned, the Driver's Protection Act, Privacy Protection Act. And then outside of this, of course, Sarah raised enforcement provisions, concerns related to bonding and private action.
Right. Todd?
Not interested. Todd Delos from the Attorney General's office. We don't take a policy position on the exemption levels. I think as Rick described, broadly speaking, entity level exemptions are the broadest, and in one perspective, from a privacy perspective, the least protected for consumer data protection. Data level exemptions are the next one, and use case is the most specific. I think these are all data level exemptions. Certainly happy to keep tinkering with language in a way that works. It sounds like, you know, DPPA as an example of the Driver Protection Act, similar to the other two, has a pretty strong degree of consumer data limitation language in it. So happy to look at that if it's helpful to the committee. And I would also add that given what C4 of this section, the protections provided therein, the limitations on the use of data, that seems to provide a good degree of consumer protection, even with these broader data level exemptions. So again, we don't take a strong policy position here, happy to work on compromise language if it helps.
Okay, but we're moving in the right direction, Bridget and Jane.
Well, certainly the DPPA isn't mentioned yet in this amendment, so they
So
would
we'll
be.
get to that, yeah. Jamie?
GLBA is.
Yeah. Great, okay, good. Zach, wait.
Sure. Zach Cabanelli, Consumer Protection Advocate for VPIRG from our Public Interest Research Group. I mean, when I testified, obviously we made the case that adding any exemptions, limits what people can delete. While we certainly would not, if this was a bill we were drafting, we would not include these exemptions. But in terms of compromise, in terms of moving the bill,
Yeah.
we still would support this bill with these exemptions in there. We think it would be beneficial to consumers. Going to the question that was kind of raised, a little while ago, whether or not the comprehensive bill is passed, is this bill itself worth moving? We still believe yes. I mean, it deals with data brokers. Consumers do not have a direct relationship with data brokers. They have very little rights with regard to that. This would give consumers the right to request that data brokers delete. We are now adding in some exemptions to limit some of that deletion right. But again, this is still, we think, worthwhile. So support the compromise and the continued discussion to get us to a place that works.
Thank you.
As a practical matter, is there anything that any of you see in this bill that so conflicts with other privacy bills that we have that implementation is made much more difficult, if not impossible?
Well, I think Jamie, I need to go. Jamie raised one, so I mean, as much as we can spring.
I'm just wondering if are there any others? And there's a
Whole
couple of your
deletion.
mind based on what you've read.
The whole deletion section is inconsistent.
The whole deletion section.
Well,
Can you
But
be more
it's a-
specific about that?
You remember California's Delete Act came after they had a comprehensive Privacy Act. Privacy Act had exemptions built in that legitimizing purposes that California legislature wanted to. The Delete Act built on that Privacy Act and incorporated all of those exemptions that had already been discussed. This bill is kind of getting ahead of that because there is no comprehensive privacy law in Vermont. If 71 passes, yes. So ideally, Vermont would do a Delete Act after comprehensive privacy. But again, in the privacy bill, there's already a delete option for every business that collects data, not just data brokers. It includes data brokers, but it includes everybody else. So there's a compliance level playing field. This here with inconsistencies creates two separate, what do we do with an individual that wants to delete over here that's protected for GLBA, for example? Well, that's not a good, protected for commercial credit. H211 doesn't have that same exemption. So what do we do with a request to delete in those instances?
Should there be almost in any bill that we pass some language that allows it to reconcile with other privacy bills that we have in Vermont?
so that's a big question. And so before, and I'm going to let you continue this. I have to go to a meeting in 3 minutes. So I just want to tee up the next piece of the amendment because you haven't seen this yet. And we'll come back to this because obviously we're still in this discussion. But I just want to let you know that Rob Plunkett, who is currently the chair of JITAW, has, which is, I'll just remind you, the Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee. I think you serve on it, right? And Rob Plunkett has asked for this to be included. They are very much wanting, JITALK is very much wanting to add 2 members to the Cyber Advisory Council, 2 legislative members. So I just wanted to tee that up. It's not a huge lift here, but I just wanted to give you the context for this. It helps build, yes, coming. Okay. So I just wanted to give you that context and then feel free to go back to that conversation. I just wanted to give you the context. This is a request from Rob.
Let's like to comment on that. JITALK hasn't met all year. I don't have any issue with these additions, but it's not a JITALK request. JITALK hasn't met. all
No
year.
discussion.
It's a request from Rob.
It's a request from
this.
not
Yeah.
the JITALK.
But the rest of the committee was not aware of it.
Why
Yeah.
can't he put that request in a bill in his committee?
JITALK is not.
No, I'm sorry, I mean, whatever the committee's called now, institutions and IT.
Institutions, maybe it's most germane here.
I'll walk through the language so you guys can debate the validity. So I will say this language came straight from another bill, H 560. So it's a House bill. I forget the sponsor of the bill. So it does a couple of things. We can have a discussion about the cybersecurity advisory council. We do have two members from Dry Talk here who may know about it as well. This is a council was created, I believe, 4 or 5 years ago that meets on a pretty regular basis to advise the state on various cybersecurity issues. This bill, this language is copied and pasted in Form 560. There's no legislative members on this council, and I think there's a request to have at least 2 members added. Fairly unique in that it's specific to committees. Usually you have the speaker or the committee and committees appoint those members, but this language would just have the chair of House Energy and Digital Infrastructure and the chair of institutions be on the committee, and a member from Judiciary.
This is a GovOps request. I mean, that's all I'm saying. It's not directed at you, but I sat on GovOps. I'm surprised. I don't know if the chair remembers this or not, but when we created the AI council and the cybersecurity council, et cetera, and anytime we're just adding new legislative members to like a random group that none of us have jurisdiction over, it should go through GovOps.
That's money from them. and whatnot.
Yeah. So and if we get too specific about who's supposed to be appointed, et cetera, that's a whole GovOps question. It's just, I don't know.
Tell the chair she's on GovOps and then she
Yeah.
push that there. Sorry, you can speak on it.
The 6th section is related. The council is set to sunset on 2028, and the request to push that to 2033 to give them more time to meet. Take your. So that's the amendment. No other changes. Is there more questions?
For the comment on the amendment that you've heard so far, we haven't talked about. Welcome the enthusiasm. It's a very popular amendment.
I've got 7 emails on page 211 with very complicated requests for changes in language, so I don't even know how to start deciphering through these things, but I know. Yeah. So I don't know if I'm looking at other changes as well.
Have you presented those to?
I'm not ready to present them, but I just sent you an email.
Yeah. So, and I'm happy to say this on the record. I received a request that we consider the specific needs of clinical research data. So that is like they're considered third parties to data brokers, and they manage a lot of clinical research that people sign up to participate in, et cetera. I tried to give it to Thomas because I trying to cut this part of my brain out and not be the person dealing with data privacy. I think what's clear is that this bill is not ready to be voted out today. I don't know the date is or tomorrow.
In terms of the concerns that were expressed, were there any specifics to that?
Everyone's wondering if they fall under this bill because it has unique definitions, unique exemption. I think the concern that got raised 2 years ago with the data privacy bill as well is lumping together things like genetic, biometric, consumer, et cetera, and then lumping in who's a data broker who manages this information gets extremely complicated. And if it doesn't align with other states' bills, then we are uniquely being asked to account for what this bill would do or not do to different entities. And I think that is the problem with all of these
The
bills.
issue with a lot of this is that sometimes inconsistency with other state laws who are handling data of the same type and often from the same originating sources.
Right.
Some of which would be in our database, depending on how it's constructed, and on other databases and are treated separately on a state by state basis. That is a real complexity problem that I think would be difficult for the industry, particularly if the data is not located here, which most of it is not.
Right. And I think that's Mr. Barnes' point is unless we are clear on what we're trying to accomplish, then we start to bring in a lot of other entities that we haven't determined whether or not we believe they have a legitimate use for that data.
There could obviously could also be inconsistencies in how data about Vermont is transmitted, depending upon what database it's in the first place.
Yes.
And if the databases are treated differently, sorted differently, and identified differently, that could create other issues. And again, the reconciliation issue, I don't know is particularly addressed here.
No, because we keep them layering on more exemptions, but that's just, in my mind, bad policy making.
The other members of the committee, in terms of this being ready for prime time at this point, any observations as to where you are on?
Don't please.
Hesitant,
President.
hesitant and watching the landscape here. Not quite convinced. But listening.
Senator Chipman?
I think regional consistency is important to me since we can't trust the federal government to apply it. I think that was quoted by Mr. Barn there that it's easy to bet against that happening. I'd like to make sure that we're not getting ahead of the rest of the country with unenforceable or impractical legislation.
Let's talk about enforcement for a second. What is your perception about how Vermont enforces this if in fact we pass it? If there's an enforcement mechanism that makes sense and that is sufficiently clear that we have the ability to do it, we have the will to do it, we have the departments available that have the competence to do it, and that it really serves the public interest. And maybe that's a question for the Attorney General's office to start with.
Yeah, more than happy to respond, Senator. So the way that 211 is drafted, it is layered on top of the existing both data broker law that sits on the books already, and the Security Breach Notification Act that is also operative for Vermont. There are obviously a lot of new pieces in this. Again, mainly focused on the operation of data brokers, not any entity that holds consumer information. And I do think it is important to think of those as a little differently. I'll try and come up with an analogy here, but as far as enforcement goes, we do currently enforce security breach notification, and we do enforce the data broker registration. What we have seen is that there are some changes in this bill that will help the existing enforcement. By way of example, a couple of years ago, we came to find out about a company that was taking airline data and was operating as a data broker, collecting and selling that airline ticket data. So you can think about that data as, generally speaking, the who, the when they travel, the where they're going, the price of the seats. That kind of data was getting collected, packaged, and sold.
Are they in the California Data Broker Registry?
So I have not studied the California Data Broker Registry. They are in our Data Broker Registry now.
Okay.
Because we identified them, reached out to them and said, you're clearly a data broker under state law. We engaged in an enforcement action with them. You know, I use the word with intentionally. It was a negotiated settlement, but they had been in violation of Vermont law, in our view, for quite some time, existing Vermont law, not even this new bill. And, you know, at the end of the day, they didn't pay as hefty a penalty as we think was appropriate in this circumstance. This new bill would help expand our enforcement ability there. But again, that's a circumstance where we heard about it, we investigated it, we were able to follow through on it. This bill would strengthen our ability to do that with the registration element. Security breach notification, you know, there was a big matter years ago now that involved a big data breach that Vermont led on and ended up, you know, pulling back a lot of Vermont consumer information and recovering a good amount of penalties from a major data broker, a major data breach from a large player across the country. Again, that's existing law. When we look at H211, as I think Mr. Hall said on behalf of the Secretary of State's office, without official numbers, we think there's a tremendous degree of under registration. And that's where studying it, finding some kind of partnership, either with California or another entity, I think Vermont going it alone, just my viewpoint, is probably too big a lift. And
just so folks know, California has 566. registered data brokers, not 800. They're all listed and you can see which ones. It's a great registry, I think, I don't know that recreating it here would accomplish anything. I encourage people to look at the California Data Broker Registry, including the AG's office, so we can know what we're looking for. And I clicked on, for example, citizenship. Who collects citizenship data? We should be paying really close attention to that because, that is probably of concern. That's what I'm concerned
That a
about.
basic search for California Data Broker?
Yeah, it's yes, it is a very basic search. I just always look up California Data Broker Registry, and it says on here the 11 data brokers that collect citizenship information and who they sell that data to, whether it includes law enforcement, federal government, etc. I think if we're trying to actually do the job of policymakers, we look at this, see if it gives us the kind of information we want, and look more deeply into these data brokers. I don't know what recreating this data broker registry in our state would do if you're already able to look at the 266 data brokers in California who are not registered with us. That shouldn't take $50,000
Or
and involve
the data brokers that are registered in Vermont, compare it to the
Exactly.
California database,
Yeah,
and that would also tell you something, perhaps about California.
I would hope people look at this and ask themselves, what are we trying to accomplish with this bill?
I guess the other question I have is we're talking about things that are occurring in the US. Are there any, to anyone's knowledge, data broker registries for companies that register this kind of information internationally? And how are we dealing with those? For example, is there someone in a jurisdiction that commonly takes data, for example, whether it be from Malta or Panama, that is registered there and not in the United States at all, is collecting these data, and then how does any of this apply to them? Does it? What would the AG's office do if there were a data broker in Panama that had all this information, was doing all the things that they're doing right now? What would you do?
Okay, so if I can respond to a couple different things. So Senator Hinsdale, there are folks in our office who work regularly with Cal Privacy. I don't happen to be one of them. So they're aware of what's on the Cal Privacy website and working.
So what would this bill accomplish for you that's different than their work already?
I think what this bill could accomplish is enabling greater multi-state actions around data brokers and the like, which expands the ability of the Vermont AG's office, which is one of the smallest in the country, to affect greater change and ensure greater enforcement of laws. To the question about extraterritorial enforcement, those are always really challenging cases. A lot of fraudsters, a lot of scammers are in other jurisdictions. It's hard to crack them down. It's hard to ensure that they are complying with Vermont law. And what we tend to do is work with the service providers in the United States who have more responsibility and more interest in complying with US law to attempt to limit the scope of those kind of actors.
We've talked about this forever, and we probably will at the next meeting. But unfortunately, we have to go to the floor right now. The green light is on. And thank you very, very much, everyone.
I think if we're looking for testimony, we should have the folks in the AG's office who currently work with the California Data Broker Registry come in and explain what valid. Thank you, Mr. Varn.
Thanks, Senator.